Yes, friends. In this video, we will discuss with a relative reference with the macro. How we will use the relative reference with this macro. What is the use of the relative reference? On the basis of relative reference, how we will store the data. On the next line, how the data will be stored and how to consume this data. So we want to use the relative reference with this data. So make sure that we will use the relative reference for this data. On the basis of relative reference with data, we can easily go for the next line of data. In the previous session, you have to so that data is not in a go for the next line, it will be stored in the overwrite of the data. So in this video we will start from the how to go for the next line of uh, how to work with this data, and using of relative reference we can use this. What is a relative reference? Particularly, view tab here, the relative reference is available. One type you can on this value, the next time is automatically on the value, you cannot on this value. How to on or off, you know about that. Whenever first you have to click here, then you can show here yellow borderline is coming from the user relative reference. So user relative reference, you can use this relative reference. On the basis of this relative reference, we have to use this line value. So basically you can use this line value on the particular using this line value, we have to use this relative reference value. So this is on. If I am a click here, then this is a off value. Now you can see here, this is a off. This is called as a use relative reference value. On the basis of the relative reference, you can store your data. So make sure that you want to use this relative reference with this value. You can see in the previous video, particularly username, password, we will just store at the copy this value, paste this value and go for the next line. This is called as a relative reference value. With using of the relative reference value, we can store this value in particular format. So make sure that you can using the relative reference with this value. On the basis of the relative reference with this value, we have to store the particular value. Now, how it is stored, how we can store this value, we can use this. For example, if I'm writing here username and password, here is a value, username, we will write down here also username and password, right? Here it's a value is Nidhi Shah, and sheet number 2 value is copy and paste this value. On the basis of copy and paste this value, we want to clarity about this one. Copy the username and password and paste the value in the next line. This is called username password from next value from the next parameter. Then how it will be usable. Then first make sure that your cursor is in first position. Your cursor is in not in any position. So cursor is in this position and our first cursor in first position, because when we are recording at that time the cursor position is very matter. If my cursor is any one places, then it will be store the data on that places. So make sure that your cursor position is very important. Whenever you are storing with this data, your cursor level position is very important. For example, if my cursor is here, then it will be store the data from here. If my cursor is particular here, then the data value copy this value is here. Then if my cursor is b1, then the storing from this data from starting from the b1 value. So hold the data cursor position is very much important. So make sure that cursor position is properly set in your Excel file. If it is not set, then you can set this value here same as it is sheet number 2 cursor position in username. So make sure that both the position cursor position is very much important, username and password. Here is a username and password also. So if you want to use this username and password, you can use this username and password value. So you can use this username and password value. So you can use this. Now we can copy this value, paste this value. This is one type of database you can create. Add. every places your data is go for the next line. This is very much important from our side. So in sheet number 2, you can see here our cursor position is here. Copy the data, paste the data. It cannot be overwrite the data. It is go for the next line of data. This is important from our side. Now we will check here first. It will be checked that. It will be checked here. Then record macro. Macro name 1. If you want to use the shortcut key, you want to use this. If you don't want to use the shortcut key, don't use this. This workbook, personal macro workbook, if I'm using here, relative, if I'm a record macro, and here we will write down, for example, it's macro 1. Here we will write down relative reference macro. Now, relative reference macro. Yes, friends. For the Yes, friends. For next, we will do for the we want to copy this value and go for the next this value. For example, if I'm using username here, copy this value, particular value, it will be copy here and paste here. If I am a copy this value here, yes, friends. Now we will write down username here and a password here, right? Here we will write down username and password, and here is also username and password. Cursor position is very important. So we want to use this cursor position. If we will use this value on the cursor position, then we will use this cursor position. Here is a values in B1 places. Here is a value in a B2 places. So now you can see here, copy the data and paste the data into the next position. So we will copy the data on particular positions and paste the data on a particular positions. So we will use this particular data. So make sure that you want to use this particular data on this position. Now, cursor position is particular first position. Here is a B1 and here is a A1, right? Now, what can you do? First view, then go for the record macro. Macro name is relative reference underscore. You can use this underscore. Space is not allowed. Relative reference. Then if you want to use the shortcut key, you can use this. This is this workbook, not a personal macro workbook. And you can use description. Description from a relative reference using from next line. So we have idea about why we can use this macro. Now here is a relative reference is not on. How we recognize that? because no any yellow line is coming from this button. Border part of yellow line it's not coming. So relative reference is not on, right? If it is on, then it will be relative reference value. It will be store this value. You will be store this value. Use the relative reference this value, then copy this value. Control C. Now, if it is pasted here, but this value, if I am pasting here, then it is wrong. Why it is wrong? Because Control V and go for A2 to A3. If it is transpose this value, then paste and transpose this value and go for the next line, right? If you want to go for the next line and go for the sheet number 2, delete the record and go for the first positions. Done. Stop the recording here. Now, what can we do? Control C. It's a copy the data, paste the data, transpose the value, and cut the data. It's a one type of process. We can create a one type of database. Now, what can we do? We can do for the insert, then go for the shape. In this shape, we want to create some shape. Write down, assign the macro. Assign macro is your relative reference macro. And if you want to write down anything, you will be write down submit. Submit button is important button. You can drag this button anywhere. You can paste here, right? Now, what can we do? First, we will do for A and V, right? Our cursor position is first position. Yes, this is a mainly disadvantage of relative reference macro. Every places we put the cursor on the first position. If we will put the cursor on first positions, then we will store the data. If it is not put on first position, we cannot store your data. So make sure that it will be store your data in the particular location. So you will be storing your data in the particular location is very much important cursor positions. Now, if I am going from this data and press the submit button. Now you can see here, go for the data next line and automatically cursor position in next line it will be stored. So this is a particular data with the next line. If you want to store this data, if you want to store the particular data in the next line, then you can use relative reference macro. Otherwise else, relative reference macro, it will be used when our data will be stored onto the positions wise the data. So the next line, your storing of the data in the next line, it is very usable. If I am writing down, for example, ZZ, our cursor position is different. It is not in a first page. Then what can we do? Submit button. Now you can see here, blank line is allowed. No any data is allowed, right? If I am changing here, my cursor position is here and submit the data. Then you can see here only for second data is going, first data is not go. So this is a disadvantage of the relative reference macro or macro. This is not a disadvantage of relative reference, but this is a disadvantage of the macro. It is a store on the particular location, so it will be stored onto the this location. Data will be not perfectly working. So every places cursor position is in first, then you can use this. If I'm using WW, then you can use this value. Now you can check here that the value is ZZ and WW, so you can store your data. On the basis of this one, we have to store the value. We can change this position. We cannot store the particular location, but we can change the position also. So here we can show that one blank data is it allowed in your data. So we have to know about that. Any blank data is coming your Excel sheet. So you have to clear idea about this one. One blank data is coming from your data line. So this is a particularly basic value. You have to use this value. On the basis of this value, you have to store the data. Now you have to clear idea about this one, which one data is storable or which one data is not storable. So make sure that you want to use this data. On the basis of this one, you have to store the particular location for this data. So you can store the data on the particular location. Now you have to clear idea about this one relative reference value. So you have to show the particular data on the relative reference. So make sure that you want to store the data of any of this location. So make sure that you want to store your data. For example, if I'm putting here QQ and press the submit button, it will store the data in the next line. For example, if any data is blank, if any character of data is coming from your side, then what can we do? If any data is coming from your side, then go for the data tab, data validation. You have to put out this value, text length equal to, for example, text length equal to compulsory, it will be equal to, not equal to, but greater than, this value is 3. It means later is allowed from 3 characters. So you can use this value here. So you can use data validation with using of macro here. So at least 3 character your name you can write down, A as D, and here is the password, greater than 3, greater than not equal to ASDF. So at least 4 character you have to write down. Here is a ASDF. You can write down this value. So date with using of data validation, with this value you can use this value. On the basis of this value we have to put out the value. So we have to clear idea about this one. Now we have to submit this button. Now you can show here, this is the data of ASDF and ASDF value. So particular for this data of this value, we have to store this. We want to also use the data validation of text length, whole number is equivalent to date. If any validation from the date is between from this date to this date. For example, you have to create a user form. For example, you have to create first name, last name, text length equivalent to this one, then date, time, birth date. You want to create some birth date value. So if you want to create this birth date value, you want to use this birth date and this value. So if you use this birth date and time value, you can use this date and time also. So you can use this value. On the basis of this one, you have to create a particular data date. For example, if I'm writing down here is a date, for example, username is your birth date, then what can we do? Data validation, date between start date is, for example, 13/06/2021 to 20/06/2021, and okay. Start date is invalid. For example, here we will write down today. It's a 06/20/2021. So now if I am writing here 06/15/2021, it will be allowed it. But if I am write down 07/15/2021, it will be not allowed it. So any date, any birth date, any joining date you will be entered with your database. This is very useful when you are creating with your database. If you are creating with your database, then you can use this value. So data validation with using of related reference. Now you can see here related reference macro is on. Now it's on. You can see cursor for here. Use of relative reference so that macro are record with the action relative to initial selected cell. If you are record macro in cell A1 which move the cursor to A3 with this option turned on. It means that if the cursor in A1 and move to A3, then you can use the related reference macro, because it will be store the particular location for this value. Running resulting macro in cell J6 to move to J8. Moving from the one cell to another cell, it will be useful. If this option was turned off when the macro was recording, running it in cell J6 and move the cursor from J3. It's mean that here is a one scenario. It will be display the one scenario here. For example, if I am doing, if your record macro in A1, which is cursor move to A3 and turn on running the resulting in J6 to move the J8. J6 to J8, it will be moving on. If this option is turned off, when it will be directly convert to the J6 to A3 value. So it will be not a properly value, it will be stored from this value. So make sure that everyone value, it will be stored from this value to make sure that it will be using from this value. So record from this macro and viewing from this macro. Now you have to clear idea about this clear idea about the relative reference macro. If it is odd, then it will be working from the proper places. So make sure that your data will be selected on proper place. So now you have to now clear idea about this relative reference macro. This is on this value. Now when you are selecting the this value, you have to check this value. So we have to clearing from this value. So now this is a particular data. We have to clear from this data. On the basis of this value, we want to create it this one. Now from the next one, if you want to create this data from this value, now how want to create it this? For example, data validation. Here is a whole number equal to greater than 5. For example, if my username is 2, then the value whole number is greater than 5. Here is the date format. Now you want to change the date format. This is the number only. First it will be considered as a date. Then it will be considered as a number. So your particular date, it will be converted to the number. So make sure that your data will be converted to the number value. Right? So it is a clear about idea how we will use the relative reference. When you are storing the data in the position wise, then you can store the data in the relative reference macro. If it is not the storing the data on the positions wise, then you cannot store the data with this value. So number value, date value, text length value, you can use any of this value. By using of this value, you can store this particular data. So it will be exactly matched with your position. It is very useful when we are using this file. For example, if the username and password it's a blank, equivalent to blank. If it is duplicate value, then highlight the color. For example, if I'm writing username is AA, it is a whole number, I think so. And if you write down this value, that both the value is same, then it will be highlighted. So username and password cannot be same. You can see the text message data review comment box also. Username and password, username and password, it's not same for your location. So it is more useful when the username and password is same. It will be use this value. If you are when I am clicking here, if I am deleting this value, if I am putting here the text box, you have to put the text box because text box value is not a particularly go for anyone place. You have to write down here username and password is not same. So if you write down 5, 5 is not allowed for. If you write down here is 10, the color value is changed. We cannot use the comment in this part because the comment part it will be deleted, but text box part is as it is part, so we can use this text box part. So if this value equivalent to this value, then we can create the particular data. So if it is using from any of this value, you can use this any of the message is equal to, is not equal to. We can use this exact message also. So exact is also match from this value. For example, if I'm using this exact value, exact text 1 and text 2. For example, if I'm writing here puja, and if I'm writing here this puja, both the values same, then it will be true. For example, some of the places our data is this one. For example, Nidhi's, I'm writing down puja space sha, and here is a space puja sha. Now we can do the exact text 1 and text 2. Text 1 and text 2, you can see here this is value is false. Why it is false? Because data is different. Both the data it will be same, but spaces is different. So if you use the VLOOKUP at that time, data is not matching. So everyone places if the data it will be same from this data. So this data from exact we will to match this data. On the basis of this data, we want to use this data, spacing from this data, and using of spacing of this data, we want to use the particular data with exactly match or not. It will be used from this value. This is false this value and native this value. Then if you am writing here a as t space a, and if I'm writing a as t some space and qw, if I'm using exact command with using of text 1 and text 2, then it will be false. If both the value, which places if both the values same, here is true. Here is also true. Now you can see here this value, it is true or false. On the basis of this one, we have to state this value. So you have to state this value. So this is basically difference. Now, if any spacing of this data, trim this value. For example, if I'm trimming this value, this is trim this value. So now you can see that trimming of this value, it will be exactly matched from the particular data. So first trimming this value, second trimming this value. So if it is trimmed the particular data, you have to set the particular location. On this value, we have to start the particular data. We have trimming of this data. For example, if we have a multiple data here, we have put out this value here also. If this false value, we don't want to this false value. So trim, basically trim the space in previous or at the end. So now you can see here previous space, at the end space, only the one space allowed between the name. It will be only allowed it. So make sure that this is a data for particular one space. It will be allowed it from there. Then it will be used this space of this particular data. So now it is used when we are using from this data. We have to this particular data on the basis of this one. We have to clear idea about how to trimming of data. Trimming of data is very useful whenever our data is matching. At that time, we have to use the trimming of this data. So make sure that we have to use this trimming of the data on the particular location and we will use this data. Now you have to clear idea about how to remove the space, how to relative reference is useful and work with the trim and exact function. This is more useful when we are doing with data with a particular file with a particular data. We have to go there. Now, okay friends, in the next session we have to create the next macro.